Good morning. Thank you for being here and for being patient, waiting for everybody to get in. My name is Dr. Matthew Touch, and I am the director of the Lillian E. Smith Center here at Piedmont College. Untangling Whiteness, Reflection and Action came about probably mid-May during the pandemic. Actually had a colleague at Michigan State University, Dr. Julian Chambliss, who I was speaking with him and he suggested it. So I have to actually give, credit where it's due. This wouldn't have happened without him and his kind of talking to me about it and not pushing me to do it, but actually, kind of speaking and saying this would be something we should do. And then of course, George Floyd on Memorial Day and everything else that has happened, of course, over the summer. So thank you for being here. Before we get going, there's a few things I want to say. First, I want to give, like I said, thank yous to Dr. Chambliss, Dr. Andre Brock at Georgia Tech, who suggested some of the speakers, Dr. James Mellichamp, of course, the president of Piedmont College, for his support, Regina Bradley, who of course is in institutional advancement here at Piedmont, and she's the one who designed the logo and all the kind of promotional materials you've seen, Brian Blunt, who was in tech and who was actually helping us with the webinar and recording it in the background, so you probably won't see him. Mackenzie Ryder, who is my student worker, and she is going to be introducing some of the panelists. Our LES scholars, Lillian E. Smith scholars here at Piedmont, Anna Melton, Angel Rucker, and Madison Hartfield, who are going to be actually introducing as well and working in the background. And then our presenters and you, the attendees. So what kind of brought about this symposium? Like I said, Dr. Chambliss, we kind of talked in mid-May, and it kind of came about, and why the title Untangling Whiteness, and especially with Lillian Smith. And before I get into that, I kind of want to show a video that to me summarizes all of this. And it's Lillian Smith reading the introduction to the journey, which is probably one of my favorite kind of openings of any book. And it's a book that doesn't deal with race, doesn't deal with any of those issues. It has those in there, but it focuses really on her kind of search for herself and the kind of existential questions. But the opening is powerful and important, I think, for this discussion that we're going to have today. So I just kind of want to show this to you and then introduce everything, and then we'll get started with our first panel.
There is no going alone on a journey, whether one explores strange lands or Main Street, or one's own backyard. Always invisible traveling companions are close by. The giants and pygmies of memory, of belief, pulling you this way and that, not letting you see the world life-size, but insisting that you measure it by their own height and weight. But you forget this. You start out feeling free. Your bags and your brain are packed full of supplies and facts for your trip, all the things you think you need, and then you get on your ship or plane or whatever, set for places you have not seen, friends you have never met, and suddenly something is there beside you whispering, better not look at that, better not listen. Come, I know a place, a person. What a talent these companions have for luring us into dead ends. And yet, I could not have done without them. For though there were a few memories, an old worn-out belief or two, that almost stopped me before my trip had begun, there were others that opened doors wide. And it was by their help that I found at last what I had gone in search of.
Smith's words at the introduction there, of course, talking about the giants and pygmies of belief. And that we carry with us on our journeys, whether we go on Main Street or we go across the world, really kind of hits me and talks to me, because there are things that we didn't necessarily come into the world believing or come into the world thinking, but they're surround us. And that's kind of what whiteness is, at least to me. You know, I didn't choose to be white, of course. I wasn't born and said, hey, I want to be white. But that's who I am, and it's what's affected me. And what I think too is about that image that Regina made with the I apologize for all the emails coming in. People are registering, and I had to get to them and figure out the sound after this, so I apologize. But the trees, I always think about, when I think about these issues, I think about trees, and I think about the roots that run deep. I think about Ernest Gaines and his writing, and Just Like a Tree, that talks about, in a different situation, but an individual being compared to a tree and taken up, and then the taproot remaining. You know, there are oak trees in Louisiana, they're over 400 years old. There's a tree, and there's a ginkgo tree that I just saw that's 1,400 years old. The roots run deep. And the roots didn't start with us, but they started a while back. And I think that's kind of the important thing to think about, is that there are roots that we have to untangle. And Regina's image and the promotional material shows that. If you look at actually that picture with the tree and the way that things are curled around the other letters, we have to kind of disentangle ourselves from them. And I always think about a quote from Frank Yerby too, who's another author from Georgia, who was he was a Black author, and I use that in quotes because his father was African American and Seminole, and his mom was Scotch Irish. He could have passed. He did pass occasionally. He expatriated, wrote 33 novels. But in an interview in 1977, he actually said this quote. He said, "I despise adjectives. Adjectives are the enemies of nouns." And when I think about that quote, I always think about the ways that we talk about race in this country and elsewhere. And we talk about Black, using Black as an adjective, as a descriptive term. And then, of course, we don't think about white in that way. We don't think about the ways that that's invisible. So those are the things I think about when I think about these issues. I think about Lillian Smith. I think about how she went into herself in Killers of the Dream and elsewhere, and actually examined herself in relation to everything around her. She talks about at one point that the frame that is around every Black child's neck is around every white child as well. It affects not just the person being oppressed, but the person who is doing the oppressing. And that is what she looked at psychologically, the ways that these things affect individuals. So that's kind of the impetus for where this symposium comes from. And of course, a lot of the events, like I said, that have been happening this summer, this year, kind of add to that as well. And it's an important event to kind of get us to open these discussions and have these discussions. And that's where this is kind of stemming from. So we're going to get started at 10 o'clock, but there's a few things I want to tell you real quick. First and foremost, we do have books for sale from the presenters. You'll see it in the slideshow. There's a slide actually that has the link. And there are books from the presenters like Dr. George Yancey, Dr. Sindra Bongstad, I believe Dr. Sarah Higginbotham, one of the books she edited is in there as well, and Dr. Veronica Watts and others. We also have some other books too that deal with this topic, that deal with race, class, and things like that. The Color of Law, which deals with actually housing. Stamped from the Beginning, which deals with the history and construction of race from the Enlightenment forward, and other books too. You can see that there. The other thing that we did as well was I asked the panelists to kind of construct a playlist that deal with these issues, and that will be playing in the background. It's a very eclectic playlist. There is some language in there, just to let you know, but if you look at the slides, there's actually a link to the playlist as well if you want to go check it out, and if you want to add anything to it. As I would also suggest too, please, if you're on Twitter or social media, follow us on there at LES_center throughout the day, and use the hashtag Untangling Whiteness to actually post about the symposium, any thoughts, any conversations, so that we can actually take the conversation online and engage there. The chat is actually disabled for attendees. However, there is a Q&A button down at the bottom. If you click on the Q&A button, you can actually submit questions there. The LES scholars, myself, and the panelists will look through the questions, and we'll actually pick a few of them for the end of each session. There'll be about a 15-minute time period at the end of each session to actually answer questions, have a little bit more discussion. Each session will last about 45 minutes. There'll be a break. So about 10:45 for the first session until about 11. And that break is actually so that we can get up and walk around, because I don't want to be sitting in front of a computer all day. I'll start hurting. So just to give us some time. There will be a lunch break as well at noon. And what I'll do during the lunch break, there is a short kind of 20-minute video called Miss Smith of Georgia that was filmed by CBS, I think in 1962, where Lillian Smith talks about kind of her work, the role of art in her work and other things too. And we're going to show that. And then we'll come back at 1 o'clock for the 1 o'clock panel. So again, thank you for being here. Make sure, like I said, if you're online, use the hashtag Untangling Whiteness. I'm going to go ahead and start the slideshow, and then we'll start our first panel at 10 o'clock.